Hello everyone. Today I continue analyzing the video of the El Buen Librero. In this time, Cecilia Cáceres, the historian, uh, give us the topic of the title of this interview, the thematic of this interview, called "Why is there so much resentment in Peru? The world no one wants to see." I'm struck 10 ideas from this interview. One, ready go, let it go. The first idea is when historians step public. In the interview, historians should be encouraged to step outside their field of action and share their knowledge with the general population. Students should be encouraged to read not merely to memorize data, but to deduce and understand the context in which events take place. This quote of Cecilia uh, presents two powerful interconnected arguments about the role of history in society and education. Firstly, it advocates for historians to engage in public discourse, moving beyond academic circles to make their insights accessible. This is a crucial call for democratizing knowledge, combating misinformation, and helping the public see contemporary issues through the clarifying lens of historical patterns. Secondly, it redefines history education from rote memorization, memorization to a discipline of critical thinking, emphasizing contextual understanding, deduction, and the why behind events. I'm sorry. Okay. I strongly agree with both proposition. They address a dual crisis. The public often fragment understanding of history and the student's experience that can drain the subject of its inherent drama and relevance. History is not a static list of facts, but an ongoing conversation about cause, consequence, and human experience. When historians share their work publicly, they model this contextual thinking. When teachers focus on deductions, they equip students not just with knowledge, but with a tool, historical reasoning, applicable to navigating news, politics, and even their own lives. The second idea uh, that I can extract of this interview is a Gramscian diagnosis from Ribagüero. In the interview, Ribagüero mentions that there is no ruling class in Peru. What exists instead is a dominant class that is aware of its role and needs to connect with the people. This class knows what its goal is. Gramsci, Gramsci is a historian and in Peru a figure took up Gramsci ideas. This is a fascinating and dense text that layers and specific Peruvian's political analysis with a major theoretical influence. The core argument attributed to Peruvian intellectual José de la Ribagüero makes a critical distinction. Peru lacks a true ruling class, one that legitimizes its power through cultural and intellectual leadership integrate with the nation fabric, and instead has only a dominant class, one that exercises coercive economic and political control. but remains separate from and unheeded by the broader populace. The key missing element is connection, hegemony, in Gramscian terms. The invocation of Anthony Gramsci is a potent appropriated and appropriate. As a Marxist theorist, Gramsci precisely argued that a class cannot maintain power through force, domination alone. It must also win the consent of society by shaping its values, culture, and institution, intellectual and moral leadership. This project of building hegemony is what Rivagüero saw as absent. The unnamed Peruvian figure who took up Gramsci ideas is almost certainly José Carlos Mariátegui, the founder of Peruvian Socialists, to uh, Peruvian Socialist though. Mariátegui brilliantly adapted Gramsci concepts encountered during his time in Europe to analyze Peruvian reality, emphasizing the need to build a revolutionary culture grounded in indigenous and working class experience. I find this framing powerfully insightful for understanding persistent crises of legitimizing and social fragmentation in Peru and similar post-colonial states. It suggests that political instability stems not just from economic inequality, but from a profound failure of the elite to articulate a national project that resonates with the historic and cultural identity of the majority. The dominant class knows its goal, likely the preservation of its own wealth and privilege, but cannot or will not translate it into a hegemonic project that earns popular consent. Ribagüero, Ribagüero complexity. José de la Ribagüero was a paradoxical figure, a conservative historian and politician, yet a sharp critic of the Peruvian oligarchy. His diagnosis came from a traditional, even aristocratic perspective, lamenting the lack of an enlightened paternalist ruling elite capable of national unity. This makes his use by later leftist thinkers like Mariátegui particularly interesting. Mariátegui, creative, creative Marxians. José Carlos Mariátegui is the key link in his seminal work Seven Interpretive Essays on Peruvian Reality. He argued that socialism in Peru had to be a heroic creation, not a copy of European models. He used Gramsci-like analysis to study the role of myth, culture, and the indigenous common ayu as potential foundation for a new hegemonic bloc against the dominant coastal oligarchy, an imperialist force. The hegemony, the hegemony concept. Gramsci developed this theory in prison notebooks, writing under Mussolini's fascist regime. He distinguished between domination, the coercive apparatus of the state, and hegemony, the ideological and cultural leadership in civil society, schools, media, churches, arts. A stable order requires both. ¿Más comida? Gracias. Oye, esto, ¿no? Vaya. No sé si lo he visto. I'm sorry, modern relevance. This analysis remains a vital lens for Peru today. The constant political turbulence, the disconnect between Lima and the province, and the popular protest against a rotating cast of political leaders can be interpreted as symptoms of a still unresolved hegemonic crisis. No group has successfully built a stable, lasting consent that bridges the country deep geographical, ethnic, and class divided. The dominant class retains economic power, but the ruling class, with broad cultural legitimacy, remains elusive. In summary, the text captures a central dilemma of Peruvian national building: the transition from mere domination to genuine consensual leadership by bringing Ribagüero empirical observation into dialogue with Gramsci, universal theory, and Mariátegui local application. It provides a profound framework for understanding the country political story. The idea number three extracts for this interview. In the interview, the dominant class of the 20th century required only labor drawn from the peasantry or from indigenous people, but it used this labor solely with the aim of keeping it as a working class. Carlos Mariátegui, being a Marxist, believed that the country was heading toward a better future. Setting aside political inclination, he also argued that if one wanted to establish in socialism, one first had to overcome capitalism. This quote represents two-part analysis central to understanding Peruvian political, economic, and revolutionary thought. The first sentence offers a sharp critique of the 20th century Peruvian dominant class relationship to indigenous peasant labor. It argues that this class practiced a form of extractive subjugation, not integrate development. Labor was pulled from traditional communities solely to maintain a subordinate, exploited working class, proletariatization, not to create a shared national project or elevate a worker's social and political status. This perpetuated a racialized and feudal economic structure within a nominally capital framework. The second part introduced the seminal thinker Jose Carlos Mariátegui and captured the essential and often misunderstood dialectical nature of his Marxism. His belief in a better future was rooted in a historical materialism analysis, not mere optimism. Crucially, the text highlights his orthodox Marxist view that socialism must be built upon the material and social foundation created by capitalism. In the Peruvian context, this means that the feudal colonial relations described in the first sentence had to be fully transformed by capitalist development, which will create a unified proletariat and the industrial means necessary for a socialist transition. Mariátegui saw this not a desirable stage to linger in, but as a necessary historical phase to overcome. I find this pairing exceptionally insightful. The first statement diagnoses the problem: a stagnant, exploitative, dominant class. Mariátegui argument provides the historical pathway out. This retrograde structure must be shattered by the very forces of capitalism's modernization is resisted, however painful, to create a condition for true liberation. His genius was in adapting this universal Marxist tenet. to the specific Peruvian reality of a large, oppressed indigenous peasantry. No, no, no. The idea number four, finding a nation purpose in its own soil. In the interview, a country that has no goal or utopia based on its current situation tends to believe that its goal lies in Peru countries, in European countries, or in the United States. Seeing this way, we end up thinking that we are poorly made or unfinished copy. But our reality is different. Our way of seeing the world must be tied to our own reality, our land, our diversity, and our possibilities. Another issue to address is that if we continue to view the peasantry as the sole source of labor, we are out of step with the times, especially in the era of AI, when much of that labor and even thinking itself is being replaced by machines. This quote in the interview presents a powerful two-part critique of post-colonial development and identity. The first section diagnoses a profound psychological and cultural dependency, the absence of a national goal or utopia, a forward-looking project born of local conditions. Create a vacuum filled by external model, Europe and USA. This leads to a debilitating sense of being a bad copy, a framing famously explored by post-colonial theorians like Franz Fanon, who described the colonized mind internalized the inferiority imposed by the colonizer. The proposed remedy is a turn inward towards an authentic epistemology rooted in one's own land, diversity, and historical possibilities. The second section, one moment, Franz Fanon. Okay, Franz Fanon, who described the colonial mind. Okay, that is a really good quote. 1 minute, please. No, no, no. Peruvian characters. Okay, that's really important. Okay, return. Okay, I find this argument compelling and urgent. It connects the cultural struggle for self definition with the material empire of economic reinvention. The text suggests that a nation cannot achieve technological or economic moderning by cycling to outdated social structure. It must instead define its own modernity. The true challenge is to build a utopia that integrates cultural authenticity, the first part, with a forward-looking economic model that values its people not as obsolete labor, but as citizen in a post-labor or red-skilled future. Okay, idea number five: rethinking Peru's dependency. In the interview, Peru is more of a satellite. It's more of a satellite, a channel for the interests of Europe and the United States, often believed to be the sole cause of Peru's current situation. Mark Bluck argues that history is defined by an entire range of events. One minute, please. During the time of Agustin Gamarra, a man from Cusco, a man from Cusco? Okay, he was al- allied with the interests of the authoritarian elite and the powerful classes. The business dealing between Peru and Chile. This text weaves together a geopolitical metaphor, a methodological principle from historiography, and a specific historical example to construct a nuanced argument about Peruvian history and agency. Agency. The opening statement presents a classical dependency theory perspective, describing Peru as a satellite or channel for foreign Western interest. However, it cleverly avoids monocausality by stating this is often believed to be the sole cause. There will be inviting a more complex explanation. The invocation of Marc Bloch, the great French annals school historian, is pivotal. His idea that story is defined by the entire range of events or causes directly challenge simplistic single factor explanation. It demands that we look beyond grand geopolitical forces to include social structure, economic trends, individual agency, and mentalities. This theoretical lens is then applied to the example of President Agustin Gamarra by highlighting that this caudillo from Cusco was allied with the interests of the authoritarian elite and the powerful classes. The text introduces a crucial internal actor. It suggests Peru's satellite status was not merely imposed from outside, but was actively facilitated and negotiated by domestic power blocs for their own benefit. The final fragmentary mention of business dealing between Peru and Chile opens another layer, regional dynamics and economic entanglement further complicating the picture. My opinion is that this is a sophisticated and correct approach. It balances the undeniable weight of external imperial and economic pressure with the agency and complicity of local elites. It argues that Peru's historical trajectory cannot be understood solely as victimization by Europe and the United States, nor solely as the product of internal violence, but as a complex internal play of both, set within a wider regional context. This is a matter block inspired story history. Idea number six: how geographic shaped Peru's economic imagination. In the interview, in the 19th century, the Andes were seen as difficult terrain for building railways and roads that would connect all the region of Peru and make the country more efficient. Mariano Felipe Paso Aldán portrayed the Andes as a wall that blocked all efforts. From that century onwards, the Peruvian highlands ceased to be seen as a primary producer of wealth, while other valuable products such as wine or cotton and wool were emphasized. In a way, the indigenous people who had lived, lived there for a long time were rediscovered. Analysis and opinion. This text offers a concise and powerful analysis of a pivotal shift in Peru 19th century national consciousness, focusing on the changing perception of the Andes and its inhabitants. It moves from a practical engineer problem to a profound cultural and economic re-evaluation, initially framing as a logistical obstacle, difficult terrain, a wall. The Andes were symbolical and economically marginalized in the nation project. The driving force for this was the rise of the coastal export economy, centering on commodities like wine or cotton or wool, which reoriented the nation of efficiency towards global markets rather than internal integration. The most potent idea here is the concept of rediscovery. This, implied, this implies that the indigenous people of the Andes, who had continuously inhabited and shaped the region, were rendered invisible by the dominant coastal elite perspective, only to be seen again as a social problem, a labor reserve, or an object of study. It was not they who changed it, but the gas of the nascent Peruvian state and its ruling class. This process is a classic case of internal othering, where a core component of the nation is treated as foreign and backward to justify its political and economic marginalization. I find this analysis crucial for understanding modern Peru's profound regional and ethnic divides. It illustrates how infrastructure is never neutral. The failure to build railways into the Andes, as opposed to ones that extracted minerals from them to the coast, as opposed to ones that extracted mineral from them to the coast, was a political choice that cemented geographic and social fragmentation. The text revealed that the wall was not just in the mountain, but in the minds of the planners. Idea number 7. How racism undermined Andean unity. One second, please. Andrés de Santa Cruz, born to a Bolivian mother and a mestizo Peruvian father, was a Peruvian military leader and politician. He was one of the architects of the Republic of Bolivia and the founder of the Peru-Bolivian Confederation. His goal was to unite Andean commerce, but this idea faced strong opposition from the Lima elite, who, who conducted business with Chile and saw their interests trade, threatened. In one of these debates, Felipe Pardo de Aliaga, a critic and politician, attacked him through satire and ridicule. He belonged, he belonged to a privileged limeño class that believed it had greater rights. His strategy was that when arguments against Santa Cruz ran out, they would resort to belittling him as a Highlander or an Indian, insulting his origins through his mother. These ideas were promoted by a newspaper, but today it's difficult to know the name of the paper that spread this racist view. This quote is very powerful. Concise illustration of how 19th century nation building in South America was fractured by competing economic interests and deepest social prejudice. It moved beyond a simple biography of Andres de Santa Cruz to reveal the ideological and cultural battles that doomed his political project. The core conflict is present with clarity. Santa Cruz's vision of a united, internally focused Andean economics bloc versus the Lima elite establishing outward-looking commercial ties with Chile and, by extension, the Atlantic world. The most significant insight is the analysis of the opposition's rhetorical strategy. It showed that debate was not purely political or economic. When those arguments were exhausted, the elite weaponized social and racial hierarchies. By mocking Santa Cruz as a Highlander or Indian via his mother, Felipe Pardo de Aliaga appealed to the pervasive racism, and coastal Criollo sense of superiority that define Lima's privileged class. This tactic aimed to disqualify Santa Cruz not on the merit of his confederation, but on the perceived inferiority of his origins, framing a project of highland unity as inherently backward. I find this narrative critically important. It demonstrates that the failure of the Peru-Bolivian Confederation was not just a matter of geopolitical or military defeat by Chile and Argentina. It was also a failure for within, sabotaged by an intrigued Peruvian elite that saw its identity and interest as fundamentally incomplete, incompatible with, and superior to a project rooted in the Andean inferior. The text reveals how racism served as a potential politic tool to protect economic privilege. Idea number 8, the unwritten limits of Peruvian democracy. In the interview, after Ramon Castilla abolishing slavery and compensated the slave owners, there was a poem titled The Constitution of Peru, in which one of these lines mentioned that those who had been freed pardon, would now want to become members of Congress by setting them apart or implying that these people had stepped outside their proper class. It becomes clear that every time Peru goes through a process of democratization, these mechanisms are reactivated and don't recall a person of African. And personally, I don't recall a person of African descent having been a congressman, president, or the head of ministry. Okay, this interview incisively connects a specific historical moments to a persistent systematic patterns in Peruvian political life. It begins with the ostensible progressive act of abolition under President Ramon Castillas, but immediately highlights the profound anxiety it provoked among the elite. The seated poem The Constitution of Peru acts as a cultural artifact that reveals the true limits of the liberalism. The fear that the formerly enslaved would aspire to Congress was not about capacity, but about social hierarchy and place. Abolition was acceptable as a moral and economic modernization, transitioning to other labor system, but genuine political empowerment was not. The analysis that this reaction exemplified as a mechanism reactivated in every democratic opening is powerful and correct. It identifies a cyclical pattern of inclusion and containment. Formal rights are granted, emancipation, suffrage, suffrage, citizenship, but informal culture, social, and economic barriers are reinforced to prevent a fundamental redistribution of power. The concluding observation about the absence of Afro-Peruvian congressmen, president, or minister is the devastating empirical proof of this mechanism's enduring success over nearly 170 years. It shifts the issue from one of historical anecdote to one of ongoing political exclusion. I find this a crucial framework for understanding not only Peru, but also many post colonial republics. Democratization is often a negotiated process where elites set the least threatening forms of inclusion while vigilant guarding the corridor of true authority. The mechanisms you describe is the toolkit for this ward duty. satire, social stigma, racial coding, and the mobilization of a pre-existing caste consciousness. The idea number 9 provides providence, guilt, and omitted blood. In the interview, it mentioned the idea of historical guilt that we carry, that we carry, and I want to understand exactly what it is. It is said that Bartolome Herrera. It is said that Bartolome Herrera was invited by Ramon Castilla to give a speech. In that speech, he stated that Peru independence was granted by divine providence, omitting all the blood that was shed to achieve it. He also said that Peru was born from two kingdoms, the Spanish and the Inca. All of this softened reality. The conquest was violent and traumatic, a massacre. Even today, similar terms are used that discourage critical thinking, leading to the conclusion that all current problems don't originate anywhere in particular, when in fact one must look to history. The Spaniards were conquerors of many empires. I'm not sure the Spaniards were conquerors of many empires. I'm not sure whether Spain belonged to a larger kingdoms or was itself a conquering one. But in any case, many historians mention that conquered peoples, such as Muslims, indigenous people, or Jews, retaining certain rights, although many aristocrats of the time did not want to accept this. Oh, recién 38 minutos. Vaya, vaya. Necesito hacer ejercicio. Okay. Uh, these quotes of the interview provide a compelling construction of foundational national myths and the psychological concept of historical guilt. It identifies a specific moment, the speech by Bartolome Herrera, as emblematic of a process of historical sanitization. Herrera, a conservative priest and intellectual, frames independence as divine gift, granted by divine providence, and Peru's origin as a benign fusion of two kingdoms. This erases the violent, contingent, and human struggle for independence, and more profoundly, the catastrophic violence of the conquest itself. The text currently argues that this softened reality, such narratives serve a dual purpose. They provide a palatable, unified origin story for the new nation, while absolving the present of deep historical responsibility. By making the past seem like a natural, even faded, blending of glorious legacies, it discourages the critical thinking, needed to trace contemporary social fractures, ethnic inequality, land disputes, political centralism, back to their violent origins. The historical guilt mentioned is the un- uh, unacknowledged burden of this erased violence, a collective inheritance of trauma and injustice that remains unresolved because it has never been fully admitted into the official story. Your regation, your, your interjection about Spain's own history as a conqueror is astute. It contextualizes the context of the Americas, not as unique evil, but as an extension of Iberian Reconquista mentality and legal frameworks. The note about conquered people retaining certain rights touches on the complex Spanish colonial legal system, like the laws of the Indies, which in theory, but often not in practice, recognizes indigenous people as subjects with soul and rights. This complexity is often flattened in simplest narrative of pure genocide. Uh, Spain imperial precedent. Your questioning is precise. Spain in 1492 was itself a newly consolidated conquering kingdom. The union of Castile and Aragon, the conquest of Granada, the last Muslim kingdom, and the expulsion of Jews created a militant, crusading Catholic identity. The conquest of America was seen a continuation of the Reconquista, the legal concept you reference. The conquered people retaining certain rights stemmed from medieval Iberian siete partidas laws was debated in events like the Valladolid controversy between Bartolomé de las Casas and Juan Gines de Sepúlveda. This created a tension between theoretical rights and the brutal realities of exploitation. And the last idea it's called how a report pathologizes a people. In the interview, the Uchurakai report, as I understand it, was written in 1983 after several indigenous people were found to have killed journalists who had gone to cover the situation in that area. Two reports were presented. The one from the political left stated that the peasant had been coerced or persuaded into carrying out this act. On the other land, on the other hand, Mario Vargas Llosa, in his report, portrayed the Indians or indigenous people as being with an atavistic violence that persists due to the rejection of their ancestors by the Spaniards. For this reason, he argued that people from the Andes are opposed to joining the capitalism system or the modernization movement promoted by the dominant sector, which is an aberration and a falsehood. This conclusion would imply that the peasant, the man from the highlands, has no independent judgment and is driven only by violence. Okay, this text dissects a pivotal and tragic moment in modern Peruvian history. The 1983 Churacay massacre, where 8 journalists were killed by Villaherds, and the fiercely contest official narratives that followed it astutely contrasts two diametrically opposed framework for understanding the event, revealing a fundamental battle over the representation of the Andean peasantry. On one side, the leftist report offered a political and contextual explanation. The peasants caught between Sendero Luminoso guerrillas and the military in the terrifying war zone acted under coercion or persuasion. This frames them as rational, if desperate, actors within a specific historical moment of extreme violence. On the other side, the text focuses on the report by Mario Vargas Llosa, who chaired the official, the official investigate commission. His conclusion, as presented here, is a profound exercise in cultural and racial essentialism by attributing the violence to an atavistic drive born from ancestral rejection by Spaniards. He removes the act from its immediate political context, the internal armed conflict, and places it within a timeless, pathological racial psyche. His, his lip that explains a rejection of capitalist modernization serves to frame the Highlander not just as violent, but a inherently anti-modern, a barrier to national progress. Your final critique is devastatingly accurate. Vargas Llosa logic does indeed strip the peasant of independent judgment and historical agency, reducing complex political and social reaction to a primal, inherited racial impulse. This narrative served to absorb the state and the broader societal failure that lead to the conflict, instead blaming the victim of the conflict for their own backwardness. I find this a crucial case study in the power of elite interpretation. In a moment of national trauma, Vargas Llosa report provided a cultural explanation that was in effect a deeply political act. It defended the modernizing project of the coastal elite by casting its most tragic opponents, and not just wrong, but biologically and culturally destined to be so. You need to remember, bro, Vargas Llosa atavians and its intellectual pedigree. The concept of atavic violence is not it's not novel. It draws from outdated 19th century social Darwinist and positivist ideas that view indigenous people as living relics of a primitive past. This thinking was prevalent in early Peruvian criminology. Vargas Llosa, despite his liberal worldview, applied a variant of his essentialisms, revealing the persistence of these racialist frameworks even among anti-authoritarian elites. Well, that's all. That is my analysis about this interview. I hope you enjoy it and see you the next another next time. Bye bye.